It is my pleasure today to introduce our esteemed panelists and moderator for today's discussion. With us today, we have José Francisco García, or Cheche García, Associate Professor, Public Law at the Universidad Católica de Chile. We have Carmen Foulon, Coordinator of Public Opinion Research at Centro de Estudios Públicos, or CEP. And Valeria Palanza, the Dean of History, Geography, and Political Science Departments at the Universidad Católica de Chile. Your moderator today will be our event co-host and esteemed partner in this whole series, Domingo Lovera, Associate Professor and the Director of the Public Law Program at Universidad Diego Portales. So with that, I will hand it over to Domingo. Just want to thank everyone again for being with us today and look forward to the conversation. Domingo, over to you.
Thanks, Marta, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure actually to host, along with the Canadian Council for the Americas, this series of webinars where we have been discussing, mainly through the lens of international experts, some of the key proposals the Constitutional Convention included in the draft that has just been rejected last Sunday. So with the same aim, we want now, looking within Chile, we wanted to have a follow-up panel to discuss and reflect about the results of the plebiscite, and of course, to explore what is the scenario to come. Will the process continue? And if the answer is yes, how it might continue. I would like to open the conversation by highlighting a few questions and reflections on what has just happened. First, is a constitutional replacement, let alone one that embraces such structural changes, possible without an active and meaningful participation of the political elites? Second, how relevant are within that scenario the political parties? And more complex still, can a constituent moment serve as a space to revitalize their credentials before the people they claim to represent? Third, if political parties and political elites are key to the success of a constituent replacement process, as I believe they are actually, what is reasonable to wait for a political crisis and their popularity to be at the rock bottom before moving forward with the constituent process? So let's not forget that, anticipating probably an eventual crisis, President Bachelet proposed a replacement path for the Constitution. And one of the reasons, not the only one, of course, but one of the reasons why that proposal was discarded was because some claim, right? There was not political crisis that made the process necessary. So was it reasonable to wait for that crisis to literally explode before moving into the constituent process? Fourth, if political parties and political elites are key to the success of a constituent replacement process, how much room the internal rules of the constituent body left open to have the inputs of those elites and political parties to be channeled into the final draft? My impression is that the internal rules of the constituent body, the Constitutional Convention, were sometimes too linear and make finally very difficult to have to go back on some discussions that already took place within the convention. So that prevented in some way some adjustment between what the convention was discussing and what we could call the, I don't know, the thermometer of politics, what was happening outside the convention with what was taking place inside the convention. Fifth, how should debates that deeply divide societies be addressed? And more importantly, I believe, do we have a standard to evaluate or to determine which those issues are? So I would like to recall again that the first time this idea of constitution making in deeply divided societies was put on the table in relation to the constitutionalization of social rights. However, is that debate something that divides a society as deeply as that of, I don't know, plurinationality in the end, as it probably happened to be in the Chilean case? Are we not running the risk that considering every single debate as something that deeply divides our society, regardless of its substantive intensity and consequently leaving everything for regular politics? And last but not least, there are many voices, including voices among those who promoted the rejection of the proposal, who claim that there are some issues that, as I say, despite the rejection of the proposal, are here to stay. gender parity, social rights, some form of recognition of indigenous people, and probably decentralization of political powers, among others. So do you see it that way? How relevant are these agreements on the big titles? Are we not opening probably the field to have more in detail discussion about these big titles? So this is something that I would like to open the floor to, so you can consider that. So without further ado, I open the room for our panelists' reflections. We will start with Carmen, who will shed some lights on the numbers of the last Sunday's plebiscite. And then we will move forward with José Francisco and Valeria, if you're okay with that. Carmen, thank you thank you so much for joining us, and the screen is yours now.
Well, thank you very much, Domingo, Marta, and everyone on the panel for inviting me, and everybody to be hearing this. So I'm going to share a slide regarding the data and some reflections, and try to make it brief. If not, Domingo will cut my microphone, and then I can still discuss. So let me share my screen. So, well, as it has been all over the media, we had a plebiscite last Sunday, which had first of all, I want to highlight is the high participation rate of the plebiscite we had for the first time since 2012, when we had the constitutional reform that changed from voluntary voting towards from mandatory voting towards voluntary. Now, this is the only election that we had with mandatory voting, and we had a very high percentage of participation, 86%. So I have highlighted the entry plebiscite in 2020, which had the higher participation rate since voluntary voting on 2012 within a sanitary emergency as the pandemic. So it was a very high participation. It was exceeded on the second round election. Then with the mandatory voting, we have similar results that for the early days of the democracy in Chile, what we had a high registration and high voting. So I just wanted to discuss a bit how we understand the results. So first, I wanted to show you the electoral turnout by municipality, by poverty level. So I will first show you the two points. The two lines are for the first is for the red one is the entry plebiscite, and we observe kind of a socioeconomic bias, since municipalities that had more than 10% of the population under the poverty line had a decreased participation as the poverty increased of the municipality. The socioeconomic bias decreased with the second round election with a higher participation rate, which is the turquoise line. So we observe not a big change between the first 3% poverty level and 10%, and then a decrease in participation by poverty level of the municipality, but slower. And then we see and sorry, this is in Spanish, the participation rate, the electoral turnout by poverty level of the municipality for the exit plebiscite, which has observed. It had mandatory voting, so we expect a higher participation, and we observe that. But what is very interesting to see is that we had an inverse socioeconomic bias that we are used to, in which more people participated so less people participated from the richest municipalities in the country overall. And then we had a higher percentage participation of 10%, and then a somewhat decreasing, but then again with a slower decreasing trend. So it's kind of an inverted U shape. But we're used to see this as the general view of the country. And since we try to understand the results, I think it's important to try to understand how they vary along Chilean territory. And I'm going to show you now distinguishing by the kind of city that the municipality belongs. So I'm distinguishing between Gran Santiago, which is the capital city, which has about a bit more than 40 counties are in Gran Santiago, which is the big metropolitan area. Then we have other metropolitan areas that are big cities in Chile, from the north, Antofagasta, Valparaíso, Concepción. And then we have municipalities that belong to cities that are non-metropolitan, so smaller cities or urban rural areas. And what we see, I think it's very interesting to begin to understand what happened in terms first of participation, is that this strong trends of socioeconomic bias in the first, in the entry plebiscite and in the second round election, which are the red and the green lines, are mostly observed in the metropolitan areas, both Gran Santiago, which is the capital city, and the others. And we observe the inverse socioeconomic bias occurring in the plebiscite for the municipalities belonging to the big capital city. We do not observe a strong socioeconomic bias in the other municipalities belonging to other big cities in the country. And we observe this inverse metropolitan bias in all elections for the areas that do not belong to metropolitan areas. So I think we need to try to understand and unpack what is happening in terms of mobilization strategies that differ depending on the type of city that people are living in. So when we see this high turnout and mandatory voting, we are concerned about the percentage of people that voted forced to vote, but didn't have a very clear choice. So they didn't want to express a clear choice. And in general, in the literature, you see that under mandatory voting, invalid voting is seen as some form of abstention. So I emit a null vote or a blank vote, and it's a form of abstention because I'm forced to go to the ballot booth, but I did not want to go. And what I wanted to highlight, and these are all the invalid vote, the percent of invalid vote for all elections since 2017, is that did not happen for this plebiscite. People at the ballot vote, at the ballot booth, at the electoral booth, did emit the vote once they were there. So we have a slightly higher voting in invalid votes in the exit plebiscite than in the presidential election, but much, much lower than in other elections as upper house or lower house, or for the constitutional convention, the election of the representatives in the constitutional convention. So in terms of territorial distribution, and this is about the results, we see that except in 8 counties, mostly in the metropolitan area, 6 and 2, Rapa Nui and Juan Fernandez, which are insular territories, we observe the rejectal won in all counties, but the percentage of the vote that accrue each option varies along the territory. And it's interesting to see that we observe in the northern regions, the deeper the green, the higher the percentage of the vote obtained by the rejection option. So we observe, this is Chile divided in 3. Sorry for those, I should have put names for those who are here, but the first part is the northern and up until the mid city, the coastal city and Gran Santiago. We see that the deeper green is up the north on the extreme regions, especially on the extreme north, those that are limiting with Bolivia or Peru. And then we see in the second part, which is from the center, southern and southern regions, we see a strong support since the southern regions to the south, especially, which has also been commented on the streets, on all regions from the Biobío, Araucanía, Los Ríos, Los Lagos, which are regions who have, some counties have high percentage of indigenous population. And then we have the southern regions and the southern communities. So how do we observe and how the electoral results, the support for each option varied by municipality level? So we see, and I have already divided, and we have horizontal panels. In general, and in the literature, it's usually seen that the support, for example, for leftist candidate, which is the green line body in second round election, is higher since it increases with the poverty level of the country, and we observe that for the big capital city or the metropolitan city. We observe for the exit plebiscite the same tendency, in which the support for the approval option in the entry plebiscite in 2020 was also higher in municipalities with lower income, that is higher poverty levels for Gran Santiago, and we observe the reverse for the Cast, which was the rightist candidate in the second one election, in which his support decreases as the poverty level of the county increases. What is interesting are two things that I wanted to highlight. First, that pattern is only observable in the Gran Santiago, in capital city metropolitan counties. In the other countries, those belonging to metropolitan areas in other parts of the country, we do not observe that bias. They're mostly flat or even reversal. And rural areas or small cities, we also do not observe. And the second issue I find is also interesting is that that bias that we did observe in Gran Santiago, which is the capital city, for the entry plebiscite and for vote, is not as strong and even sharply decreases, and it's almost flat for the options of approval in 2022 and rejection in 2022. So we see a different pattern that is occurring in this election, not only in participation, which is mandatory, but also in terms of the distribution of results by poverty level of the country, which it's also interesting to try to understand the results. So in my final data that I think would shed some light, and I think we've seen this, some of you may have seen them, is we have seen this data by percent, which I think is how the election votes are counted, but it's interesting to see numbers of votes, and people actually casting a vote. So if we assume that most, if not all those who voted in the entry plebiscite voted in the exit plebiscite, so we have the same people voting in two elections, since the vote was mandatory, those that voted before probably would have voted in the mandatory voting. We observe, and I have drawn first in this graph a blue line, which means what we would observe is the number of people that voted for the approval option in the entry plebiscite were exactly the same as the number of people that voted in the for the approval option in the exit plebiscite. And what we see is that the orange line is below the blue line, which means that fewer people, not only smaller percentages of the overall vote, but fewer people casted a vote for the approval option in the exit than in the entry level. And I think this is something important that we have to try to understand what happened, why happened, and how do we interpret those data. So some final thoughts to not extend. So I think we should be cautious of falling on paternalistic and somehow very elitist and interpretation of the result. I think that's a concern. We have seen some interpretation of this, mostly in social media, which is usually not the best place to find agreements or moderating voices, but I think we should be concerned about that. And how to understand, I just wanted to end with 2 points from survey data. The first is what we have some increasing negative prospects about the Constitution. We measured the la encuesta, the survey from Centro, Estudios, Públicos, which is nationally representative, face-to-face survey, which levied in December 2019, which was before the constitutional process began, but in the midst of the social outburst that led to this constitutional process. We have a very positive view. 56% thought that the constitution would probably, a new constitution would probably solve the problems. In August 2021, almost a year and a half later, we still had a positive prospect with 49% of the population thinking that it probably will resolve. But in April, May, the perspective have decreased and only 36% thought that it would resolve the problems. And the negative view had increased mostly doubling from August 2021 from 15 to 29%. But these results about the negative view of the Constitution, it's important to keep in mind that people still want change. And that is important, which was what we discussed at the beginning of this panel, is that we surveyed the person in April, May 2022, before the plebiscite, but since it was starting to become an option, a real option that maybe the rejectional option would win, we asked people if the rejectional option won, what will be the better for the country? And what we have is that 42% think that it's better that a new constitution should replace the actual constitution, 31% that it reforms, and only 15% wants to keep the constitution. So it's important to keep in mind, as we all said, that the process continues. And to end, I think it's important also as a final note to understand the results. Chile is not a polarized society in terms of ideological terms. If we see that this, and this is a classical question that we have used in the CEP survey that has come from the International Social Survey Program, which is ask people to define themselves in a line between whether one, income should be more equal, although a personal effort is not rewarded, or personal effort should be rewarded even if personal income differences are produced. And what we see first is what we don't have an empty center and two opposing views of society. So that is fairly distributed in all three, maybe more in the more effort view of the society. But what I want also to highlight is that 49 and 50%, the blue bars represent people that voted in the both rounds of the presidential election. So we see that like voting, usual voters. And we see in the first orange line, 50% are those that did not vote in the previous two presidential elections. So those that are not used to vote. And they view the society very similarly. And this is interesting when we try to understand all these new voters that enter the plebiscite. And even among those that voted for Kast and voted for Boric, which were very two different presidential candidates with very two different programs, we do not see such a polarized view of the world. But what we do see, and these are primary results of a co-author paper in which we're using an online panel, so it's not completely representative, but I think it's important to start discussing this. We ask questions based on a study done in the US by Kelmo and Mason, in which they ask whether the opposing voters, in the case of the US, the Republicans, were asked about the Democrats, whether they were seen as a threat to their country, which is the darker colors, and whether the opposing are not just bad for politics, but evil persons. So it's just a moral understanding. And what we see, and this is highly worrisome, is that the pink bars are from Chile, are similar in terms of the US, and we see that for those that have a view, partisans, either those that voted approval or rejected, almost half of them think that the opposing voters, the voters for the opposing option are a threat to the country, and about 40% think that the voters of the opposing option are not just bad for politics, but evil. And I think that should start also the conversation. So with this, I finish, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. I think these are a great analysis, and it's important, as you said, that we keep on analyzing this data so we can actually engage in serious assessments of what happened last Sunday. And I totally agree with you. Probably social media is not the best place to find that serious thought about what just happened. So thank you so much. It was very, very illuminating. So we move now to José Francisco, Cheche, as well known as Cheche. So Cheche, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Domingo. A very nice panel this morning. Wonderful colleagues, so I'm very happy to be here. Just a couple of thoughts regarding the what's happening. If I can make it. Let's go. Yes. Can you see it's okay? Okay, great. So what's happening right now? I think one of the important discussions that we're having right now among political parties, but specifically between the winners, those that basically led or are perceived as the most important portion of the rejection option, is that we're having two competing interpretations among what's happening right now, how to continue. There's a very conservative group that is basically pushing the hypothesis that the existing constitution is in relative good shape, and that and we could interpret the huge result of the 62% of the rejection in a line like the following: Chileans want to address social problems with public policies, not with a new constitution. We will take the necessary time to propose constitutional reforms. That is the most conservative interpretation, but I think that right now it's winning momentum. I want to be very cautious about this, but I think that is starting to grow, this sense that we have to have much more cautious. We have to take some time to reflect about the next steps. The other conservative, and here I'm talking about the center-right, the moderate to right representatives, and also a significant part of the center left in Congress, they say no, we have a political obligation with a new constitution. The rejection basically won because we proposed to the Chileans that give us a mandate to start a new process for a new and a better constitution, and that is basically the rejection vote. We ask you to reject, but because we want to start a new process, a fresh process for a new and a better constitution. But we're having basically this discussion among the conservatives right now in Congress. Of course, the other part of the center left and the left parties, the government parties, they want to continue with a 2.0 constitutional convention. But basically, and I'm going to show in the final slide, we have today a very conservative Congress. So that is very important to keep in mind. Secondly, we have tough times for President Boric. The rejection has been also interpreted as a referendum against his transformative government. So President Boric, a couple of days ago, make a huge change of cabinet, an important change of cabinet. A lot of analysts interpret this for moving from a very leftist government or governmental program, a public policy program, a transformative program, to a much more moderate social democrat, more center-left lean government. We're going to see what is going to happen. I'm just suggesting what some analysts are saying right now. And the other thing, and very important, is that the opposition, the conservative opposition, is challenging his policy agenda. So they basically say, while we're discussing the next steps for how we continue or we restart a constituent process, we want to say you that you don't have the votes for your tax reform, you don't have the votes, the necessary votes for the pension funds reform, you don't have the votes for any health reform. So the opposition is also challenging his policy agenda because they interpret that the rejection is basically a very huge mandate, not only for the constituent process, but basically a political mandate in all of the political sphere. Another effect is that Congress retakes control, is now the epicenter of the new 15 November agreement. The 15 November agreement was the first agreement, the political agreement that started after the social outbreak, the constitution process that just failed this Sunday. So what is basically the discussion regarding the content of the new 15N agreement? The procedural key definitions are more or less these ones. Elect a new constitutional convention in the next couple of months. Some parties are proposing November, December. some actors, important actors, the electoral service, for example, they are saying we can have another election till at least March or January. So there's discussion, when can we elect a new constitutional convention? This constitutional convention 2.0 must develop its task in a shorter period of time, for example, 6 months, maybe less. So we can have a functioning new constitutional convention between January and August of 2023. We have to rethink the blank slate problem. So how we're going to have the draft of the new constitution. So in the 1.0 convention, the idea of a blank slate was a strong idea. The idea we have to have a draft from a blank slate. We're not going to reform the existing constitution. And also, if we can have an agreement by 2/3 majority in any institution, principle or rule of the proposal, basically we have to send that regulation to a legal regulation. So you don't have a default rule considering the existing regulations of the existing constitution. So this discussion is very important because right now, Congress is thinking, well, if we're going to have a new constitutional convention, we're not going to have a blank slate. Again, we're not going to start a new constitution from a blank slate. So basically, we have to going to give a mandate to the convention, basically to consider a comparative between maybe the pre-existing constitution of 1925, we have effective till the September 11 of 1973 with the Pinochet coup d'etat, the existing constitution of 1980, the President's Bachelet proposal that was discussing Domingo when he started the panel of a new constitution we call the Constitution of Bachelet of 2018, and the proposal of the Constitutional Convention, the rejected proposal. So the idea is that we're not going to start from a blank slate. We're going to basically work among these 4 or 3 of them, something like that. But we still have the problem of the default rule. Defining the default rule is also a problem. The other important definition is that we're going to have, this is more or less the consensus, a much more stronger expert commission or a committee of experts that is going to be an important part of the process. So now, basically, the discussion is we're going to have a neutral, independent commission of experts, or we're going to have more a partisan line committee, proportional to the election of the new constitutional convention. How strong is going to be this commission? It's going to basically write the new constitution, propose the draft, and then it's going to send it as a draft to the elected new constitutional convention, like the Spanish ponencia of the 1978 Spanish Constitution, a strong panel of experts that is going to be a parallel partner of the convention, like in the South African convention, where the panel of constitutional experts was very strong. Another question, this experts commission is going to start working right now in the next month, before we elect the constitutional convention. So the commission of experts can not only start to draft a proposal for the discussion in the constitutional convention that will start on January, for example. This committee of experts can also start to prepare the draft of the rules of procedure of the new constitutional convention. So basically, more or less, there is a consensus in Congress that we're going to have a new role for an expert committee, but we have to have these important definitions. And there's another important consensus that whatever the result, we have a new constitutional convention, we have a more or less strong commission of experts, we're going to have a new exit or ratifying referendum, more or less by September of the next year. I think that another important point is that, but this is but here we don't have a consensus. Is the new agreement going to have a substantive? It's going to be not only a procedural agreement as the 15N agreement. We're going to have a substantive definition, a preliminary substantive agreement. For example, some scholars are suggesting that we can follow the 34 principles of the South African interim constitution of 1993, that was like some directives for the Constitutional Assembly going to the Constitution of 1996, the Moncloa Pact going to the Spanish Constitution of 1978. They have a very robust preliminary agreement regarding substantive issues. So we don't have, again, a blank slate. I think that this is very important. Or the Irish Convention, although the Irish Convention was basically a constitutional reform convention, but they have basically 8 topics. Then they add 2 extra topics, but basically they have a roadmap leading to the most important structural pillars of the new constitution. So, for example, 5 political agreements that could be very general, very minimalist, but maybe important, could be that Congress in the new agreement, for example, oriented the new convention saying, look, we have the first political pact is that we're going to have a social and democratic state of law, but a robust social market economy, or the basis for a social market economy, and also granting a sustainable development. So we're going to have a very strong protection of nature and the environment, but we're going to have an equilibrium among these three important parts of the Constitution. The social constitution, the ecological constitution, and the economic constitution in equilibrium. It's perceived that the proposal of the convention that was rejected has a strong social and democratic state of law, a strong constitution, a social constitution, a strong ecological constitution, but didn't have a strong economic constitution. So we have to re-equilibrate this formula. That could be a very important political agreement. This is basically the Moncloa Pact. Was a strong part of the Moncloa Pact, of course, excluding the ecological constitution. If we're going to have a second pact, if we're going to have a stronger social and democratic state of law with a stronger economic, social, and cultural rights, we need to address the importance of the private sector and civil society providing these social and public goods. Today, civil society and private sector has a very important role providing these goods. The Constitutional Convention was more or less ambiguous regarding this. It depended on the area of social rights, but now we're going to have a much more importance to civil society and private sector collaborating in areas like health, pensions, education, housing, basically maintaining what is happening right now in the existing constitution. Then we have another important pact, the New Deal with indigenous people. I think that the idea that the Constitutional Convention proposed a plurinational state, I think that right now is off the table. So maybe right now we can have a lot of the rights, the collective rights included for the indigenous people, the right to consultation, very important. I think that all of that is going to maintain. But I think that we're not going to have the clause of plurinational state, recognize autonomous indigenous territories. Some of the things that proposed the Constitutional Convention, I think they're going to be maybe out of the table in this discussion. How to move to a decentralized regional state and what to do with gender equality and parity. I think that these 5 political agreements, plus others, for example, we are not going to eliminate the Senate. The Senate is going to ask for a clause like that. in the Constitutional Convention replaced the Senate with a chamber of the regions. So right now, the Senate at the epicenter of these negotiations, maybe they're going to say explicitly or implicitly that we have to maintain the Senate in the new Constitution. And a final slide, basically the Chamber of Deputies right now, only the right and the center right have more or less the 45% of the Chamber of Deputies. Other moderates have another, they have another 14 deputies. So basically center right, moderates, and center left could easily make this agreement with the 4-7 quorum that mandates the Constitution, the existing Constitution, due to a recent amendment to the Constitution that lowered this specific chapter from 2/3 of both chambers to 4/7. And then in the Senate is much more conservative. The right plus center right, they have 25, or the Republican Party, very conservative, they have 1 senator. But basically the right and center right, they have the half of the Senate. And they have also, we have 5 more moderates. So basically the Senate is really conservative, and for the rejection option is really strongly represented in the Senate. So we have a very conservative Congress. Both the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate is very conservative, and this is very important because it's going to have an important it's going to be an important aspect of the veto powers that are going to play in the negotiation that we're having these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheche, for your presentation. It's funny, I used the word at the beginning, some issues that are likely here to stay. And I think that we agree on almost every topic. I left out environmental protection because I think that's the new urgent and constitutional topic of comparative constitutional law, and I think that's going to be the new issue. But it's funny. I consider myself friend with Cheche, but we didn't talk beforehand this panel, and we agreed in the main topics that probably are going to be here to stay as a, who knows, a substantive default principles that must guide the following process. So now we have Valeria's presentation. Valeria, the screen is yours. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, before I begin, I want to thank Marta Blackwell and the Canadian Council for the Americas and Domingo, Lovera for inviting me. It's an honor, a privilege to be here. So thank you. And also, well, hello to my fellow panelists. It's always nice to share this space. I'm going to share some thoughts. I didn't prepare a presentation for today, but I would like to share some thoughts and my analysis of the situation here in Chile. So, you know, as a follow-up to Carmen's presentation, I think that these results and the fact that the vote was mandatory gave complete legitimacy, right, to the result, this weekend's result, right? So this rejection of the constitutional text proposed by the convention is undeniably valid, and I think this is important, right? In an era in which politicians tend to question results, the fact that we have a very strong majority constructed through a very large participation of the citizenry in this vote lends much legitimacy to the result, and this is important. It's important also as a sign to politicians, right, of where the preferences of the citizenry lie, right? And so having said this, my concern is that this rejection of the constitutional text may be interpreted and has been interpreted as a revaluation, like a reappreciation, a higher appreciation of parties, which I don't think is the case, an appreciation of the current political class, which I don't think is the case, right? So I think part of my concern is that this could lead to some of the strategies that Cheche just pointed out, right? And that may bring problems in the longer run. So let me just say, right, so we were all surprised by the gap of this result, right? Everyone I think was open to the fact that the rejection of the constitutional text could win, but the fact that it won by such a large margin is what I think in part surprised everyone. But if you look at the literature in political science, which is, I'm a political scientist, right? So if you look at the literature does tell you that representatives tend to be more to the right or more to the left than the mean of the district that elects them, right? So if a right-wing representative is elected, that person will tend to be more to the right than the people that elected him or her, and the same with the left, right? And so, if we think about this, then we can understand that what happened with the convention was simply an extreme version of both right-wing representatives and left-wing representatives. Of course, the left was in a higher proportion in the convention. And so understandably, what came out of the convention was a bit more, or a lot more, to the left perhaps than the median preferences of Chilean society. And that's what the citizenry rejected. Should that surprise us then? Well, no, it shouldn't, right? Now, if you add the fact that most, and not all, but most of our conventionalists, the representatives in the convention, were not professional politicians, right? They were activists, some not even activists, right? They were just regular people or people from civil society that entered the sphere, right? But they weren't professional politicians, so they couldn't have these strategies or calculations of what the population at large would accept or reject, weren't in their calculus, right? And so this all makes sense, right? And further, right, while Carmen showed us that the Chilean society is not polarized, and and her data shows that, I think I didn't see her show us data on how polarized our elites are, right? And so that, I think, is something that we should keep in mind. So maybe society isn't as polarized as the elites, but the elites seem to be way more polarized than society, and that was also reflected in the convention. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is whether we can interpret the rejection of the constitutional text as a rejection of this government's performance, right? And that case has also been made. And I think it's unfair, and I think it is not reasonable to make that case, although the government itself has understood it to be that way. I think that it's fair to keep both issues separate, although what I see is, of course, the convenience for the right and conservatives in general to make this argument, right? Because it leaves the right in a better position to both negotiate reforms that have to take place in the realm of public policy in these next few months, in the middle of a crisis, right? An economic, worldwide, I would say, crisis, on the one hand, and of course, they're standing on issues regarding the convention. So while it's convenient for the right and conservatives in general to make this claim, I think we should all be careful, also because the uprisings in 2009 are not, in 2019, I'm sorry, are not that far away. And to think that that came out of nowhere and that those demands simply disappeared would be a mistake, moving forward, right? So the fact that Chile has to write a new constitution, I think, is not questioned by most. There is a small sector in the right that, as Cheche pointed out, is making different claims. But I think that the broad consensus in society, both at the societal level and at the partisan level, is that a new constitution has to be written. This was the mandate that came out of the initial plebiscite a couple of years ago, and that was also a very powerful result, indicating that Chile wanted a change of constitution, and that change should come out of a constitutional convention, right? So those two things, I think we would all, be wrong to disregard now, just given the result of this last plebiscite. So again, looking forward at this new situation we're in now, where we have to decide how this new convention will come to life. As I mentioned, I think that it would be wrong to believe that this has been a validation of partisan affairs or parties in general, right? So I think our population, our society remains distrustful of parties. And so, if we look back at what brought us to this constitutional moment, it was this deep crisis, I would say, of representation, and the lack of or the low legitimacy of the democratic system in general. And so if what we need, regardless of what constitution comes out, but what we need coming out of this process is to legitimate the political system, the constitution, parties, renew trust in these institutions, then the convention or the process leading to a new constitution should be such that it can enable that, right? And so to think of a convention that would only be conformed of partisans, I think, although I do believe that parties and party structure should be important within the convention, I think that independents should also be a part of the process, clearly not in the form that they were going into the previous convention. I don't think that independent party lists should be allowed, but independents in some form should be part of the process for the convention to be completely legitimate in the eyes of the public. So let me see, what else do I want to say? I think I'll leave it at that for now, and then maybe we can just talk some more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria, and for your presentation, and thanks the three of you for your great insights and reflections. Of course, we have both the chat and microphones open if you want to ask something to our panelists. I will start by asking just one question for each of you about some of the things that you mentioned. The first one is for Carmen. So Carmen, you mentioned, which is something that we have been discussing since, I guess since Bachelet proposed her path, her itinerario for constitutional replacement, which is about the role of the Constitution. You mentioned that apparently there was a decrease in the trust of the people about how much the Constitution may impact, say, their actual lives. Do you think that we have some data to show that may be because of the way the convention and the conventionalists behave? So it might have been that because of the performance of the members of the convention, that the people may have had a decrease in their trust about what the Constitution may do actually in their actual lives. And for Cheche, you mentioned and I agree with you totally that experts, constitutional experts, political scientists, and economists will have a new role in a what would be a new constituent moment. And I don't want to justify the convention, but the convention is a son or a daughter of a special political moment where political parties were on the floor, institutions were on the floor, and there was no trust, and academics and even members of the convention that were scholars or well-known academics were also at the beginning looked with suspicion. Some of them even didn't want to be called professor or scholars when they were discussing within the convention, because they know that was something that a handicap for the debate. So, but do you think it's possible to have a panel of experts that may be selected or chosen not considering political affiliations? I'm just taking, and you were part of the technical commission that at the beginning drafted the proposal for the constitutional amendment. So do you think that's possible? That's something that we should roll out of hand right now, or do you think this is still possible to have something like neutral experts working on constitutional matters? And the third is for Valeria, I think this is very interesting, because the way I see it, and I'm happy that you as a political scientist are providing some support for this, is that Congress became the epicenter of the new constituent process. I agree with Cheche in that, but that may be not because the people is kind of revalidating their trust on both Congress and political parties, but simply because they became the default institutional body where this process is to be think and designed. Probably the same that happened during the estallido, because during the estallido we had President Piñera that was hidden somewhere else, and the Congress took the stage to design and to define and finally to make this agreement possible. So how much responsibility have now the members of the Congress to keep an eye on what society is claiming and what society is pushing? Which are the reasons why, despite rejecting the proposal, the Chilean society still wants to have a new constitution? So how much dialogue they must have with what we might call social reality? So I want to start with these three questions, if we want to start in the same order. So maybe Carmen first.
Thanks, Domingo. So the question on the expectations about the Constitution was about solving the problems facing the country. So it was purposefully written in a broad way. So I think the decline in the positive expectations associated with the decline in the approval of the new constitutions. And I think we need, but the key question that you are asking, and I think we should try to ask, is why there's this negative constitution, this negative evaluation. So I think, and I also received like why people increasingly perceive the constitution in a more negative than positive way, and as we that ended in this result. I think I do not have a clear answer yet, and I think it's kind of premature to try to answer like completely, as many voting decisions are complex and multidimensional. For some group of people, some things weigh more than others. But the perception of the convention of and the conventionalists as negatives, as not as polarizing the debate, I think influencing the result of the evaluation of the Constitution. And I don't think that they can. Sometimes it seems that it's the people that wrote it in a way that made a bad result was part of this evaluation. We had a question on April, May about, so in April, May, just to be a short answer, the Constitution was still not finished. So the final draft was in July, but it was, the discussion about the Constitution was fairly in the media. The key issues that were already established, some of them. And one of the main reasons was the convention and how they worked and the process had gone. So I think that was an important issue. Many reasons related to the how they were polarized or did not incorporate. So I think it's related to Valeria's comment about how the convention was elected in a specific time with some rules, and that at the time maybe did not represent the general population, and for some group that was more salient than others, because we had for that survey statistical empate, how you say, tie between both options, so it was not big. So I think that's a one, but I think other that's not directly to the question, but I think it's positive, and I think and it's important to address, is how people conceive a constitution with the main issues of a public policy and how they may be addressed. And I think it's, in a sense, it should be positive that people do not expect not the big issues of the country, but the urgent items that a constitution may not solve immediately. So waiting list and some sort of issues may be addressed in some ways by the change of structure of power by the constitution, but in the next few months, they will never be changed. And I think that's positive in terms of changing expectations. So if we end up with a new constitution, the expectations are more realistic, because of, I think what is urgent, and this I finish, is that, and maybe I ask again, how can we address that? We need to build a new constitutional convention, but it's imperative to address the issues that led, as Valeria mentioned, to the social outburst that after a pandemic are probably worsened in these days. And I think that's a big issue that we have this challenge ahead.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. Cheche?
I think that basically political parties in Congress, they are lost. I think that they're trying to win time these days. Yesterday was the first roundtable for achieving an agreement, and basically they didn't agree anything, and they are having the next session on Monday. But basically they are expecting the polls. What are the polls saying about what we're going to do? This conservative idea that people really needs to solve. They want that their social problems be solved immediately, and we have to push the constitution discussion forward. Now the polls are going to say that. If they say that, politicians are going to panic, or they are going to be much more moderate, and they're going to say something like, okay, we have to work a bipartisan, bi-chamber committee of deputies and senators, plus a commission of experts, plus popular initiatives and public hearings or something like that. But basically we have to need to have a strong we have to have a strong control of the process. Or maybe the polls are going to say that people want another constitutional convention, but of course the constitutional convention, the 1.0 was so discredited that is today Chileans. I don't know that they're going to ask for a second constitutional convention. I think that is obvious because of what Valeria said, and also Domingo. We need to have a good equilibrium between democratic legitimacy, participation, and deliberation, and the idea of expert. We need a new equilibrium. But this idea that we need to simply not elect new people, and we need Congress to take control. The polls, the same polls are going to say that Congress is even more unpopular than drug dealers. That is like the situation right now. They're really unpopular. So people is not expecting that the Congress is going to make itself as Valeria. We need all the social capital here to move the new process. So in that sense, I think that one of the but of course the appeal of experts of neutrality in public law, we really don't have neutrality. It's very difficult to achieve neutrality in the science, but right now, and I think it's even worse than for the November 15 agreement of 2019. I think that right now every expert is going to be much more control than the experts of before, because right now political system, they know they're unpopular, but they know that if they write a blank check for a constitutional convention, they may raise the Senate. So right now you can't afford something like that. So I think that the process is going to be really what Valeria told before. We're not going to have list of independents. Independents, they have to lower the head, and they must be very very aligned with the party interest. So that is, we're going to have a lot of tension. So really, expert can be appealing in the next poll, but I think that basically there are going to be much more control by political parties than in the previous process, that in the starting on the previous process, because we know, and I shut up here, we know that the Constitutional Convention, the 1.0, was very autonomous from political parties. The socialist collective in the convention didn't answer the phone of the Socialist Party in Congress. So political parties know that we need to have delegates or conventional. They can answer our calls. That is the basic rule. So I think that experts and delegates are going to be elected in a much more party lines than before. I don't think this is necessarily bad. I think that we know from Iceland, from the Bachelet constitution process, from this process, when you push a constitutional process against elite and political parties, that is not going to be successful. So, but we need an equilibrium, no? And right now, where you can perceive in the ambient that more elitist approach, technocratic approaches, they are winning momentum, and I think that right now they can have a political support, but in the future, citizens are not going to support that, as Valeria told before. I totally agree with that.
Thank you, Cheche. Valeria?
Yes, so your question, Domingo, as I understood it, was regarding Congress, right? And the role that Congress will play now, something that Cheche also spoke to. And why would Congress now keep an eye to the public interest, considering that the public broadly rejected the previous proposal? And I think Cheche responded this question. I completely agree with what he said. Congress would be damned not to take society into account and truly disregard, the context in which all of this is happening, and triumphantly believe that this is its own triumph, right? And that they're free to do as they please. So, but also I trust that they won't, right? I also trust that, although, so what we've seen these past few days doesn't lend much trust, right? So we've seen them be very inconsistent and apparently confused themselves, right? But I trust that things will fall into place, and eventually rationality will reign, or reasonability will reign. So that also, because we can't forget that. So one of the reasons that a new constitution was a demand, why it became a request, is the fact that under this current constitution, it is very hard to push forward certain reforms, right? And some of the reforms that people are demanding are locked by a 2/3 majority that is required to make those changes, right? So I'm not saying that all of them, but some of them, right? And so believing that advancing without a reform, a constitutional reform, be it in whatever form it may be, I think is unrealistic. And also I think that this government will have a very uphill momentum now to push forward any reforms in any case, right? So I think it is in the benefit of the government and of most actors, certainly not the far right, but most actors nonetheless, to cooperate in this current situation and push forward a reform as soon as possible. And regarding experts, I just want to say, right, I totally agree with what Cheche was saying. Experts are never neutral, right? And so although as experts, I think we've all participated in the conversations that took place over the past year or two, and we've provided our insights. I mean, I'd be wrong to say that we don't have ideology ourselves, or that we are not guided by certain principles that we believe in. And so leaving decisions into the hands of experts, I think, would also be a mistake. It's politicians that have the legitimacy to make these decisions for the population.
Totally agree on that. So we have 5 more minutes for a final round of comments. So because of the question that we got on the chat, which is, I think it's quite difficult to answer, but it's what exactly did people vote against or for in last Sunday? So we start again in the same order. Carmen?
Well, I think that's the main question that we are trying to piece out, and the main question that we need to address now. So I'm trying to grasp the answer. I think, as we all have mentioned, people voted rejection of the Constitution, the proposal of the Constitution. Why did they vote against the rejection of the Constitution? I think it's a question that we need to address. I think some of an important part rejected the Constitution per se. There also we have some incumbent punishment by the current conditions. But I think more than what they voted against, and we need to address that and understand that. I think more important is to what they would have voted, or what we need to do again, how to interpret those data on those rejection. And I think most of the people did not vote against a process of the Constitution. Most of the campaigns about the rejection of the Constitution were for a new Constitution, una que nos una. So I think that is a clear example. And there's this discussion that both Cheche and Valeria mentioned about reading the surveys and moving towards an expert debate. And I think it would be a mistake to focus on the short-term feeling despite the legitimacy of the end result. But I do think that there's also a demand for public policy or public policies. And I question that it's just a conservative move against the Constitution. I think the big challenge ahead of Chile is how to move both ways. We need to keep moving forward the Constitution, but we need to move also forward to public policies that address things that may be changed under the current constitutions. And we have some agreements that I think it's, if you look at it in a positive view, we have some agreements that 2 years before were not even thinkable about some big issues, which were, so I think there may be some space, and I think, and again, and because we're on time, but I think we need to understand, but I think it's more easy to understand what people did not want it, and I think a majority still want change, but also, and it's not, sorry, and not to see this as a conservative move, but I think we need to move forwards in both, like two-strong strategy. Like focusing only on one would be a mistake, but we need to move forwards with both because we have some big issues ahead. So that's.
Thanks, Carmen. Cheche?
No, I totally agree with the last part. I'm only worried that idea is used as a weapon against continuing the process. That was my only caution. But I totally agree. This was when President Piñera. When President Piñera, in a very violent day, November 12th of 1919,
2009.
have a television appearance asking Congress for then to be the November 15 agreement. He basically structured 3 deals, or 3 pacts. The first was against violence. The second was the new constitution, and the third was a social pact, a new deal, like the welfare state Chilean way. That deal has been completely stopped since November 12th of 2019. So I totally agree with Carmen. We have to move. So government must govern. Congress must move the social agenda very urgently, and we need a constitutional convention to start working with experts in a new constitution. And we need the 3 path working as a clock. But my only worry is that we use this as a weapon. So we need to focus on public policy, and we don't need any more. We don't have a constitutional problem. So that and I think that is winning momentum. And I want to expect the polls of the weekend that if they are near that area, they are going to increase this kind of public discourse. And in reading the results, I just want to leave Valeria and Carmen. They are the expert here. I'm just a constitutionalist. So
my turn, right, Domingo?
Yes, Valeria.
So I tend to agree with Carmen and with Cheche. Regarding the results, I think I spoke to this question also. I think it was a rejection of the specific text, and in particular of the more skewed, let's say, or extreme decisions towards the left that were included in the Constitution. I think that had a few, like 2 or 3 issues specifically, had they not been in the text, it would have passed. So I think that what society most likely wants is a very similar constitution, only excluding a few things from the text. And you know, for better or worse, I do think that plurinationality is one of them. It doesn't reflect my position on the topic, just what I think that society expressed. Now, having said that, you know, the convention will move forward and we'll see what they do with that. I am concerned that there's this, you know, need for reforms, for social reforms that will bring, you know, the people to a better place in the short term. Right now, there's a tax reform on the table. And as I was coming to work this morning, I was listening to legislators saying that they wouldn't lend support to this tax reform, right? So that's, I think, you know, the tension we face right now. So, you know, the political strategy to acknowledge that reforms are needed and then not allow the government to push forward with the reforms, because of course anything will require a tax reform. If there's no support for the tax reform, there will not be any other reforms. And so, you know, it may just be a very short-sighted political strategy that is thinking in the next elections and not in the, you know, greater future of Chile as a country, society.
Thank you so much, Valeria. Well, thanks again, Carmen, José Francisco, and Valeria, and we have Marta for the final remarks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Domingo. Thank you, Valeria, Carmen, and Cheche for being with us today. We do know that you guys are all very, very busy at this time, so I hope you do get some rest, and we will continue this this series going forward as this continues. Just a note that you can watch all of our videos of the previous events that we've done on the constitutional process on our website, ccacanada.com, as well as on our Twitter, CCA Canada. And we look forward to continuing this conversation, and thank you all again for joining us today. With that, I'll close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.